Hello friends, my name is Mrs. Bhakti Upadhyay and I am working as a visiting faculty in LT College of Nursing, SNDT University, Churchgate. Today we are going to learn about the unit number 4 in Social Anthropology, Social, Economic and Political Organization. So to start with, we will first see primitive communism. Primitive communism is an imagined first society in which all resources were owned in common, has a close correspondence with some actual hunting and gathering societies. We don't know exactly how long ago human beings evolved from other species. Modern man, according to many anthropologists, emerged in Africa about 1 lakh years ago and gradually spread out from there to replace all other species in the rest of the world. For most of that time, people lived in communally through hunting and gathering. For many thousands of years, there was no private property, no money, no working for wages, no stock exchange and no class divisions. People lived with and for one another. It was a system of primitive communism, a term usually associated with Karl Marx but most fully elaborated by Friedrich Engels and referring to the collective right to the basic resources, egalitarianism in social relationships and absence of authoritarian rule and hierarchy that is supposed to have preceded stratification and exploitation in human history. Both Marx and Engels were heavily influenced by Lewis Henry Morgan's speculative evolutionary theory, which described the liberty, equality and fraternity of the ancient genes and the communism in living, said to be evident in the village architecture of Native Americans. Engels worked this notion into his evolutionary theory of historical materialism, arguing that the transition to subsequent mode of production involved the change from the production for use to production for exchange and the transformation of communal family relations and equality between the sexes to individual families as economic unit and female subordination. The thesis has been much debated in anthropology, where dispute centers on the nature of property rights, status and authority among so-called primitive peoples. Morgan, who has so minutely studied the primitive community manners in his last and important work, described the method of hunting and fishing practiced among the redskin of North America, the tribes of the plain, who subsist almost exclusively upon animal food, show their wages in the hunt the same tendency to communism. The Blackfeet during the Buffalo Unit followed the herd on horseback in large parties composed of men, women and children. When the active pursuit of the herd commences, the hunters leave the dead animals in the track of the chase to be appropriated by the first persons who come up behind. This method of distribution is continued until all are supplied. They cut up the beef into the strings and either dry it in the air or smoke it over a fire. Some make part of a capture into a pemmican, which consists of dried and pulverized mixed with melted buffalo fat, which is boiled into a hide of the animal. During the fishing season in the Columbia River, where fish is more abundant in numbers than any other river on the earth, all the members of the tribe encamp together and make a common stock of the fish obtained. They are divided each day according to the number of women given to each an equal share. The fishes are split open, sacrificed and dried on a scaffold, after which they are packed in basket and removed to the villages. So long as the primitive communism subsists, the tribal lands are cultivated in common. In certain parts of India, says one of the Alexander's general and an eyewitness of events that took place in the 4th century BC, the land were cultivated in common by tribes or the group of relatives who at the end of the year share among themselves the fruit and the crops. Now we are going to learn about the values in the primitive economy. 60 years ago, the German economic theorist Karl Popper, a very influential man in his time, wrote a book on the way in which economic system has evolved, from the simplest savage search for food to the complexities of modern industrialism. Now Popper had never studied a savage life himself, and though he had accumulated many facts about it from travelers and the other records, the framework of his ideas in which he set them was a conventional 19th century Western Europe one. But one of his ideas was about economic values. Primitive peoples, he thought, have no conception of values. They live in hand-to-mouth existence which has no room for acts of judgment, for estimation of the future. In proof of this, he pointed to the behavior of American Indians and African Negroes who often sold their land for a trifle or a giddy trifle, a glittering bubble, a few glass of beads of no value according to our economic standards. But historically, his facts were correct. There have been many such cases of land sales for very small equivalent, but his interpretation was at fault. Later and more careful research has shown that on the one hand, the seller seems often to have had no notion that they were parting finally and irrecoverably with the ultimate title to their land. In their view, it was an occupation or the cultivation fees that they are getting from the settler. On analogy with the similar payments common in their own type of society, on the other hand, even where outright sale was meant, the good clothes or the axes, beads or knives did represent definite economic values to the primitive people. They were keenly desired and much prized. They could be used in exchange for the other good or to command the service of other people. The butcher really threw away the basis of his own argument when he talked of the glasses of beads as having no value according to our standards. For economic values are not absolute. They depend on the condition of scarcity and of intensity of the demand. By their own standard at that time, these people were getting goods of economic values. Anthropologists studied the economic activity of the primitive societies. They study activities of food-gathering tribes. They find that the agricultural system, handicraft, etc., and the functioning of cooperative credit institution and values are different from those of civilized society. For this purpose, the economic anthropologist has to make a wide use of economic principles as he is studying a society where money is not the medium of exchange. He faces a lot of difficulties in determining economic values. He has no standard and measurement to determine the economic system. Hence, he has to understand labor hours and labor wages, etc. He studied the production and its relationship to exchange. Keeping all this thing in view, he studied principle of primitive communism. Every society has to fulfill unlimited human desires by means of limited resources at its disposal. The primitive societies use natural resources unsystematically due to scarcity of the modern machines and tools. For example, primitive tribes in India practicing shifting cultivation. Therefore, they fulfill even minimum needs by means of maximum labor. However, they do have some economic surplus. In brief, The value of primitive economics are as follows. Economic relationships are based on barter and exchange. There is no provision of currency. There is no banks and other credit societies. Number 2, economic system is based upon social customs, physical conditions, and faith in ancestors. Almost no primitive crosses their limits. Profit is seldom the motive of economic activities. Mutual obligation and unity perform the function of motivation. Give and take among the primitive is the basis of economic system. Number 3, mutual cooperation and collective enterprise are characteristics of primitive economy. According to Thornwald, the Indian tribe depict a strong communal organization. Number 4, there are no regular markets. Weekly moving markets are the basis of exchange. There is no monopoly and cutthroat competition characteristic of civilized society. Number 5, there is no institution of private property. All the land is collectively owned. Land is equally divided among the families and each family cultivates land allotted to it. There is more consumption than production. Consumption includes food, clothes, and housing. Number 6, economic values change in decades. Mostly stability, equality, and simplicity are the hallmark of primitive economy. This is particularly true about procedures and techniques. There is no specialization. The division of labor is generally based upon sex distinction. In the words of Majumdar and Madan, specialization based on specially acquired specific technical abilities is absent in pre-urban societies. However, a division of labor based on a factors other than the specialization, like sex, for instance, is widely prevalent. In modern times, tribal economy has been widely influenced by rapid industrialization in tribal areas. In the words of, again, Majumdar and Madan, the impact of industrialization has affected both men and women. Tribal men work in iron and steel factories, in coal mines and tea gardens. Tribal women workers are engaged in mica and coal men in tea gardens, in quarries, and so on. So dear learners, we are now going to learn about the property in the primitive communism. Property performs a valuable role in the human society. In the most of the society, it raises the status of a person, but the concept of property has been constantly changing. In the modern tribes, the concept of property has changed along with the changes in the technology and the moral concept. In primitive society, the modern concept of property is not vague, since one does not find property in them in the sense it is the found in civilized society. For example, one does not find any property in food gathering societies. People gather fruits and roots from the forest according to their needs. Among cattle rearing tribes, cattle form the property. One hardly finds property right over land among the primitive people. In fact, property in primitive society does not mean possession of physical goods, but some special prerogative in the use of land or the animals. Property rights in primitive societies are both individual as well as collective. At several places, the pastures are under collective possession. At other places, the same land is utilized for various purposes by the various people. For example, in Malaysia and West Africa, while a person is the owner of tree on a land, another has the right of cultivation on it. The right of inheritance is connected with the right of property. Property right generally leads to the right of inheritance. In Indian tribes, the wife and the children have the right over the personal belonging of a person. But since most of the property is communal, there is hardly any question of inheritance. When person dies, there is no effect on collective property. On the other hand, the new generation constantly increase pressure upon land. Besides cattle rearing tribes, even in agricultural tribes, the land is collective property. In primitive tribes, one finds examples of both patriarchal and the matriarchal social organization. In them, the laws of inheritance are different. In a patriarchal society, the son inherits the property, while in the matriarchal tribe, the succession of property is from the mother to daughter, and the son have no share in it. Now, the stages of economy. Economics is the study of transaction between the buyers and the sellers. The study of stages in economy often refers to the development of certain types of economies, especially the capitalist economy, which is communities of buyers and sellers. However, the study of stages also includes the production function, a microeconomic principle that follows a business ability to continue to a profit from one idea. Karl Marx posited 4 stages of political economic development resulting ultimately in capitalism. He gave that the tribal culture wherein society was structured around the needs of the family developed into a barter economies and class system with the introduction of the slaves. From there, society grew into a primitive form of communism in which a union of tribes owned the property. The feudal and estate property was a further development of the tribal union wherein an entire community might produce agricultural goods for the landowners and keep a small portion for themselves. After the English and the French Revolution, the economic functioned exclusively around the exchange of currency for goods and services, a capitalist economy. Generally, the stages of economic development are considered. They are hunting and fishing stage. The second one is pectoral stage. The third one is agricultural stage. The fourth is the handicraft or commercial stage. And the fifth and the final stage is industrial stage. Now we will first start with the hunting and the fishing stage. In early times, men used to support their lives by hunting and fishing. In this stage, the wants of human beings were very limited and could be easily satisfied. For instance, when someone felt hungry, he just plucked some fruits and leaves or went for fishing. If he wanted something to cover his person, he made use of bark of trees or skins of animals. If he wanted a shelter, a cave or dense tree served the purpose. A man depended for the satisfaction of his want on what he found. He did not make anything. Wants were few and simple, and they were satisfied in a simple way. Of all the wants that for good was most difficult to be satisfied and shaped in the economic life as a whole, the plucking of fruits and plants was an easy task, but when it was necessary to kill animals with the rough instrument, much exertion and skill were required. These were the times when fruits and plants did not grow due to floods or some other reasons, and the animals become scarce due to the fatal diseases or due to their flight in large number when being chased by hunters. When animals moved to some new tract, men had to follow them. The population was therefore migratory and sparse. On an average, man requires 60 to 80 square miles of a land to maintain himself. Prisoner could not be allowed to live and easily led. Hence, cannibalism, it means the practice of eating human flesh, was prevalent. It should, however, be noted that fishing tribes were more peaceful than the hunting tribes. They did not move from one place into another very frequently, for fish increasing in numbers so rapidly that they remained plentiful in spite of being caught. This population was therefore dense, fixed. The principle of private property had not yet made its appearance. By private property is meant the ownership of property by the private individuals. In the hunting and the fishing stage, nobody possessed anything. Whatever was required was no sooner obtained than it was consumed. Each individual was self-sufficient and exchange had not yet originated. Now we are moving on to the nomadic stage. The next stage of economic education is known as pastoral stage. Animals were the center around which the economic life was built up in those days. Increase in the human intelligence had led to the realization of the value of the animals. They provided milk and wool. They ensured a regular supply of meat. They could also use for riding purpose. Men therefore began to tame useful animals instead of killing them. Animals live on grass which grows on a pasture land. The domestication of animal is therefore closely related to the availability of pasture land, and the discovery of fresh grazing ground for animals was an important problem which the people of pastoral stage had to tackle. As soon as one grazing ground ceased to be useful, they migrated along with their cattle. When green grass land were found, men used to live into a fixed abodes temporarily. Since food supply was greater in their stage than the preceding one, the population also tended to be denser. The necessity of fresh grazing grounds was a fruitful source of war, but the practice of killing war prisoners was given up in this stage, for they could be better utilized as slaves for looking after the animals and for the other rough work. The system of slavery had its origin in these days. The greater stability and increase in the food supply and the practice of keeping slaves, resulting in some leisure which men utilize in doing finer and the better things, instruments and implements to be made, better houses began to be constructed. Economic progress had its beginning in these conditions. Private property also made its appearance now. Animals were owned personally and were given personal supervision. But private property was not extended to land. Self-sufficiency constituted to be the keynote of the economic life, and exchange did not yet appear. The agricultural stage. So far man's existence was precarious, and he was on the look for secure sources of food supply. An increase in his knowledge and his growing control over nature led him to hit upon the agriculture or village of soil as a solution. This was the next stage in the economic evolution of the society. Therefore, strengthening in this stage, so was the system of private property. Land became very useful thing and was found limited in supply. The principle of private property was readily extended to do it. Warfare continued even in this stage. Whenever crop failed off or animal died, or when more land or more slaves were needed, clan conflict took place. Self-sufficiency and absence of commerce still largely remain the characteristic of economic life. Now, the handicraft stage. With the passage of time, man's knowledge and the leisure at his disposal increased, and he began to manufacture small things like knives, boats, etc. The number of occupation increased, and a man began to specialize in certain occupation. Some persons became carpenter, other blacksmiths, and still other agriculturists. Society was thus split into a large number of occupations. The manufacturing occupations were known was done by hand. Hence, the name handicraft stage. The specialization brought exchange on the stage. When men begin to specialize in one particular occupation, they produce only few things, and it was necessary for them to exchange their surplus, produce only other articles which they needed. The exchange of commerce became a necessary economic phenomena, and the trade was born. In the beginning, one article was exchanged for another. In the other words, exchange took place the shape of barter. But barter had several difficulties, like the need of double coincidence of wants, absence of measure of value, and other which shall be discussed in detail under the exchange. These difficulties led to the invention of money, after which exchange took the shape of purchase and sale. The first article manufactured by men must have been weapon to kill animals and to fight. Later on, useful articles like utensils, clothes, etc. would have been repaired. These things began to find market slowly and gradually. As market increased, merchants began to give raw materials to village artisans and get the articles prepared from them to order. The system is known as domestic system of industry and prevailed, therefore, the modern factory system. Now, we are going to learn about the industrial stage. The place of economic progress, however, continued. An inventive genius of the human race brought the machinery on the stage. The invention and the use of machinery led to such a remarkable change in the economic conditions of society that an era of industrial revolution first came in England and covered the country from 1750 to 1850 roughly. From England is found its way to other countries of the world. The machinery which were newly invented were very costly and complicated and were driven by power, as for example water, steam and electricity. It is this stage to which the society has reached today. So important is the part played by power, water and electricity in modern times that the present stage is known as the age of power. The introduction of machinery resulted in what fundamental and far-reaching changes. Powerful and costly machinery have necessitated the work in together of hundreds and thousands of workers under one roof. Machinery have increased output tremendously and have in craft out of the big factories are to be seen everywhere these days. Big factories naturally lead to a big town. A factory is a setup at a particular place, usually because the latter has various industrial advantages like the availability of raw material, labor, capital, etc. The establishment of factory brings into a prominence the industrial advantages of that place, and the other industries are also attracted thereto. After some time, it grows into a big industrial town, and a big factory and a big town have become the most prominent feature of the modern society. The introduction of costly machinery and the establishment of a big factories have created split in the society. The society has now been divided into those who own such costly thing called the capitalist and those who do not possess them and do simple work in the factory for wages called laborers. Capitalists and the laborers are generally at the dagger down. The laborers feel that it is they who work and produce things, but still they are giving only a few chips daily, while very large profits are pocketed by the capitalist. As a matter of fact, those profits should be given to them because it is their labor which creates them. Capitalist, on the other hand, feels that they invested enormous capital in the factory and it is only a natural that they should get the substantial reward therefore. This conflict often leads to the strikes and lockouts, which are unwelcome interruption in the otherwise smooth running of the economic mechanism. Machinery has enabled men to control nature and harness her resources for productive purposes. Production has therefore increased enormously. It has associated with a corresponding increase in the trade and the commerce, which which have become international. Trade is carried on with the help of certain auxiliaries like transport, banking, and the financial system, etc., of which have been largely improved. Money economy have been replaced by credit economy to give sufficient scope for the modern economic activities. In the modern industrial stage, manufacturing industry occupies a central place. Trade and commerce are considered to be their auxiliaries, while agriculture is given a minor position, though the importance of agriculture has been increased since the last Great War. Dear learners, now we are going to see the subsistence surplus in the market economy. The use of term subsistence is an ambiguous and is used in the confusing ways. The following comments focus on the meaning that is very important in the discussion of the economy. The economy assumed in the simpler way is a substance economy. The term is commonly taken to indicate a situation in which very poor tribal or a peasant family barely survive by just producing enough to feed themselves. Modernization and the development are essentially thought of as requiring the replacement of subsistence economy. However, if we consider what the economies of tribe and peasant villages were like before being impacted by the Western society, we see that these were typically complex, integrated at the village level, and satisfactory and effective in meeting needs. Now, following are the characteristics of a subsistence economy as the term is used here. The first characteristic is the crucial themes is producing with the intention and the expectation that the product will be used by the individual or his community to satisfy need, not with the intention of selling it to receive money. The focus is not on the production of commodity items to be sold in the market in order to be able to buy products from the other market. The second one is the subsistence is best thought of at the communal level, not that of the individual. In the subsistence economies of tribe, monasteries, peasants, village, and the communities, the intention is to produce what members of the community want and to distribute those things to them via mutually beneficial procedures. These may involve selling, but if so, the point is only to facilitate the exchange and accounting. There can also be trade between the communities and the trade with the external, conventional, modern economy. But these are the minor elements and are engaged into a secure small quantities of locally unavailable items and are not engaged in the accumulated monetary wealth. The third characteristic is the concern is to provide the sufficient or to produce just enough for a satisfactory life. Production work, sales and consumption are minimized rather than maximized. Non-market and non-monetary processes are maximized, such as production within households, mutual exchange, giving and assisting. Modern economics are obsessed with the fearance of determination to maximize income, profit, sales, GDP, trade, investment, wealth. The fourth characteristic is non-market consideration such as tradition, right, and justice take precedence in the production, distribution, and development decisions. The distinction between this situation and the modern economy is enormous. In a capitalist economy, the only consideration is the maximization of profit, income, and monetary wealth. This is the basic cause of most of our problem. Many bad things happen because of the moral, social, ecological, etc. cost involved can be ignored. Because the only factor that has to be taken into account by the investor, seller or the purchaser is what will maximize monetary benefit to him. The fifth one is the overriding element is that the production is not carried out in order to make profits or accumulate wealth or to invest a surplus in order to increase wealth or a capital stock. Accumulation is the defining characteristics of capitalism and shows its essential link with growth. Substance economies are stable and their participants are not seeking to accumulate. In the substance economy, capital is of little or no importance. Development depends on whether the community has the labor, land, stone, timber, seeds, knowledge, etc. Number 6. In a subsistence economy, the capital is of little or no importance. The development depends on whether the community has labor, land, stone, timber, seeds, knowledge, etc. necessary for the project, not on whether a sum of money can be obtained. Number 7. Subsistence therefore involves independence from the global economy and its sources of capital and the resulting debt and entrepreneur. Number 8. A major characteristic of subsistence economy is security. The communities are independent of the normal national or the international economies, being able to produce necessities for themselves, having interdependence and mutuality, and focusing on the effectiveness and sufficiency rather than efficiency and maximizing. These provide high level of safety in the face of adverse natural events or the devastation that the fickle and the predatory national and the international economies can inflict. What matters is being able to continue to provide, to get by no matter what happens and no matter if production is insufficient. The simple way is based on analysis of the global situation, which stresses the coming era of intense and irremediable scarcity. Growth and affluence society is grossly unsustainable and unjust, and there is no possibility of maintaining the level of resources use typically of rich countries today must be replaced by mostly small, localized and highly self-sufficient economies run by participatory processes and based on a culture of frugal, cooperative and non-material values. The argument is that we can live well in these societies. These economies are well described as subsistence economy according to the above list of criteria. Dear students, now we are going to learn about the system of trade exchange. Any pure or the perfect market exchange is said to be fair because it is the result of unconstrained rational individual decision. The ultimate expression of the fairness is found in prices, which reflect the optimal cost and the utility structure of an individual's. If one applies this criteria of fairness to the primitive societies, one may quickly conclude that economic exchange was usually unfair and based on irrational behavior. Self-involvement and hedonism were repressed or unknown relative prices were ignored. Unknown and determined independent of cost and utility. The rationality and the fairness prevailed, but this concept were based on a different socio-economic principles than that of the Homo economici because of the different social economic organization of primitive societies. There was a definite social logic to trade relation, and this logic can only be understood in the context of primitive social relations that embodied the economic practice of such population. Generalized exchange in primitive society, the hedonist and the altruistic approaches. The hedonist and the altruistic approaches provide two different ways to explain generalized exchange. The hedonist approach begins with the individual who are selfish and aim at minimizing pain or maximizing pleasure given constraint. The altruistic approach starts with the opposite premises regarding the nature of human being, but otherwise usually keep the same framework of analysis. Individuals can behave altruistically for hedonistic reasons. Both views also assume that the knowledge of the psychology of individual is necessary precondition for the study of social organization. The hedonist view begins by assuming that the scarcity is a state of nature. Primitive individuals could only satisfy a very limited portion of their unlimited wants, and the Malthusian curse forces primitive societies into a state of constant struggle in attempting to satisfy the most basic needs. It seems, therefore, that livelihood in a primitive society must be quite miserable. Primitive societies are classless societies. There is no political class and no religious class. There is no political class for two central reasons. First, anyone can become a chief by becoming older and showing good behavior, experience, generosity, 10 skills in work, skills in management and consensus building, etc. were the central factors determining who could become a chief. The second reason, the chief is the subject to the rule of the tribal members, can readily be deposited and gains no privilege from being chief. These social factors influence the trade relationship that existed among the tribal members and between different tribes. The primitive trade, now we are learning that the trade was not based on a cost-benefit calculation. Rather, reciprocity of a non-quantitative equivalence nature establishes the basis of the early trade. In fact, Wales stated that from the vantage point of a modern commentator, primitive trade rates were nonsensical. They varied widely and appear quite odd to those whose view of rationality is based solely on the conventional exchange relations of current economic organization. The early trade had no relation to supply-demand consideration, the cost-return factors, or any other economic relationships that would allow trade to be cast in a modern framework. Rather, exchange rate were indeterminate. For example, southwestern Indians conducted trade differently depending on the different circumstances. Among some tribal groups, the goods were swept based solely on availability. However, should one tribal organization encounter another situated in a poor resources area, the trade consisted of goods flowing one way only. The poor tribe's contribution to trade was solely the maintenance of good relationships. Fair value of the sort consistent with the markets only occasionally existed when prestige goods came into play. When trade with the Spanish became normalized, we do see the establishment of the regularized trade rates, but these were in the form of price lists that were clearly intended to hold for the extended period of time, if not forever. Indeed, with the rising cost of Spanish goods, it became impossible to hold to previously established price lists, and when Spanish merchants attempt to explain why relative price had to be modified, they were rebuffed by Indians who argued that the previous arrangements were in the form of a promise in which profit had no place. The data from the early hierarchical society allows one to infer more about the trade relation that existed prior to the formation of such organization. Again, we see marked similarities among these societies independent of their geographical location. As the older egalitarian structures were giving way to the class societies, big men came into control of various goods and used this control to assist in their consolidation of political power. These goods, however, were not those of basic substance but were of non-utilitarian prestige variety. Bronze battle axes, high quality, extensively decorated ceramics, jewelry crafted of precious metals, etc. Such goods require not only the development of highly skilled specialized artisans but also control over the production. The prestige goods did enter trade relation with the other chiefs, but again the relative rates of trade do not conform to the modern conception of rationality. The tribal and the pre-tribal societies could not engage in exchange. Exchange requires private property rights in the goods exchange, economic gain as the purpose of exchange, and the quality in the exchange processes in the sense that all parties must be agreement that the exchange has a right to withhold goods if the relationship seems to disadvantage that party. Exchange must be voluntarily entered into. Cannot that the exchange can be voluntarily terminated if the estimated of the cost relative to benefit are deemed irrational. The tribal society satisfied none of these requirements. Rather, trade based on the principle of hospitality had to satisfy quite different requirements. As the means of production were collectively controlled, the goods available for the trade were not privately owned. The tribal society satisfied none of these requirements. Rather, trade based on the principle of hospitality had to satisfy quite different requirements. As the means of production were collectively controlled, goods available for trade were not privately owned. So, we can say that in order to understand the hospitality, one must understand the social relationship of the primitive society. So, dear students, here we are ending the unit number 4. Thank you.